Serial killers scare us for many reasons. One of them is, of course, the crimes they commit. Brutality, unpredictability, but also the fact that any of us can become a victim of them. They kidnap, torture, murder. Sometimes they emerge from the darkness. And sometimes they kill with deceit, but they scare us not just because of that. The second, but no less important, is the disruption of world order. Serial killers don't work with a label on their foreheads. Most of them don't look like murderers. These can be our neighbors, colleagues, or people we pass by every day by going to the bus stop. They can even be our closest friends. They are often smiling, polite, warm, charitable, intelligent, and charming with a smile and a look. They are destroying our sense of security precisely because they can catch us anywhere from the least obvious side. It's hard for us to defend ourselves against them because if they have taken someone to the target, they'll do anything to bring their plan to an end. It is difficult to escape from their extraordinary ability to manipulate, and sometimes the whole world is drawn to this theater. That's why crimes can last for them even for years. Nannie Doss, called Giggling grandmother, was the woman that we would have the best idea of after the first meeting. Smiling and incredibly confident, she loved to seduce and enchant the surroundings. She was also able to lie perfectly, which made it easier for her to love between the kitchen, the next husband, as well as the quickly disappearing poison bottles. She inspired confidence, even though her forever white smile didn't always seem to be perfectly sincere. On November 26, 1954, she was arrested at a police station in Toulouse, Oklahoma. A cheerful, warm, and smiling woman entered the building, spreading a friendly aura around her. It's like she just came to the rumors at the coffee shop, not to be held accountable for the murder. And that's what the cops suspected of her. According to them, she murdered her fifth husband. Doss was smoking one cigarette after another, and she was constantly saying, "But not about my husband, not about the crime, not the arsenic." It wasn't until almost a day later that she confessed that she had delivered Sam a mouse for coffee. She said it in a tone, however, as if she was only talking about punishing an ungrateful child. In the middle of the night, she signed the papers, and a moment later even more shocking details of her life began to come out. Nannie was born on November 4, 1905, in the United States as one of 5 children. Louis and James' parents were extremely strict, especially his father. They did not belong to the wealthy people, but for that, they had a rich list of rules and duties that the daughter had to adhere to. As a child, she had to work hard in the field, and as a teenager, she was forbidden to meet boys. She was not allowed to go to dances and wear makeup because, according to James, it could provoke other men, for example, to harassment. According to some sources, Nannie's father was aggressive and used violence against her, and she met most of the boys and men she knew in the name of rebellion. Her later behavior may have been influenced by a serious accident, which she suffered at the age of 7. The girl was on the train, which suddenly stopped at some point. Nannie lost her balance and hit her head on a metal rod. For the rest of her life, she complained of severe headaches. She also said that sometimes weird thoughts came up as if she had lost her mind. The financial situation of her parents was getting worse every year, so at the age of 15, she had to quit school and focus completely on work. No one will be surprised that she married a moment later. However, it was not a romantic story, but a brutal reality that the teenager had to face. Her father chose her life partner. He became Charles Brax, a worker at the linen factory. It's been about 4 or 5 months before Nannie stood with him on the wedding cover. He lived with his mother, who completely controlled his life. The husband insisted that the couple stay with him after the wedding, which Nannie eventually stopped. And for years of marriage, the woman gave birth to 5 children. Unfortunately, 3 of them died. Brax began to become suspicious of his wife. The sudden death of the children did not give him peace. He suspected that Nannie could have been behind it. In addition, the young wife was not exactly as she was presented. She was neither devout nor charming, as the man said later. She had an explosive temper. The whole family is like that. Sometimes she got angry for some reason, and sometimes she seemed to be offended, and then she disappeared for days or weeks, often with other men, at a time when Brax was looking anxiously at his life partner. Her parents' marriage was hit by an earthquake. Leanie's father left her mother, which the girl felt extremely badly. She hated James and forbade him to meet his grandchildren for many years. She assured her that it was her mother who was most important to her, and her suffering was unbearable for her. This daughter's love for her mother has been put to the test. When Leanie was suspected that she was behind a woman's death, the marriage to Brax was not a happy one. The woman did not feel well in her role as a mother and repeated repeatedly that sometimes she had to disappear for a few weeks. Charles completely disbelieved his wife, and when he finally decided to divorce, he took his daughters and took them out of the house. He took one with him, and the other was taken care of by James. Brax always said that he left Leanie because he was just afraid of her. Later, according to some sources, the daughters were again taken care of by the woman. Doss loved flirting with every man, even having small, temporary relationships. She seduced and coquetted, although she was later accused of not showing them much sympathy for the opposite sex. She denied this, saying that in her life she had just been either into unbelievers or into drunkards. But she liked the men themselves and liked to have them with her. Therefore, after her divorce from Brax, she did not enjoy freedom for too long. She married her older brother, Robert Franklin Harrison, who had several children from her previous marriage. He came from Jacksonville, Alabama. According to Leanie, the charm after the wedding passed quickly because the new partner turned out to be a fan of the cheap gloss, which he drank straight from the jar. He was beating her and constantly bringing her into quarrels. However, he had no idea that the woman he married hid a dark secret and did not intend to remain a workout bag for the rest of her life. The couple lived with the woman's two daughters. In 1943, one of them gave birth to her first child. The second one appeared 2 years later but died shortly after the birth. Melwina was convinced that she had seen her mother kicking the baby's head. The doctors, however, did not confirm this and were unable to explain why the newborn did not survive. In the same year, Melvina's older child died. It was stated that the death occurred as a result of suffocation for unknown causes. 2 months later, Leanie took $500 from her life insurance, which she bought for little Robert. Today, it is known that she was responsible for the deaths of children. Carlson was brutal. Not only did he beat his wife, but he went a step further. She didn't make a decision then. She has to get rid of her husband. She found a jar from which alcohol was drawn. She poured a large portion of arsenic into it, and she waited impatiently until her husband wanted to reach the glass again. It happened a moment later, and Frank paid for his last drink with his life. No one, however, suspected that his wife's vengeance might be behind this premature death. Leanie's next husband was Holly Landing of North Carolina. He, as the woman said, was also an alcoholic, and besides, he could not be faithful. He was always looking at others. Leanie was jealous, and her husband's behavior was getting harder and harder to bear. Her patience ended when Holly organized a loud party decorated with sex and alcohol. An angry woman gave her husband food poison. The man died after a few hours. It was only during the investigation that it was revealed that the party that Leanie was talking about had never been organized. The party was, yes, but it was family-friendly and peaceful. So it's impossible that she was just trying to justify her next murder. So she's convinced that her husband is simply betraying her and has not one, but many lovers, who she gifts with expensive gifts. Leanie got angry. She bought a new bottle filled with poison, and she poured the deadly liquid into her husband's coffee. During the investigation, the police began to suspect that the man did not betray his wife and that the rings were meant to be a gift for her. But blinded by jealousy and personal insult, she didn't think of me rationally. That's why she reached for the only way she knew how to solve problems. After the immediate end of the fourth marriage, the woman again decided to stand on the wedding cloak. Her new target was Nannie Doss, a construction worker, extremely scrupulous and economical. And worse for Nannie, simply boring. He led a simple life centered around the Baptist church, in which he was also a preacher. He introduced his own rules in the house, with which his wife disagreed. He didn't let her dance, for example. She couldn't buy a TV receiver either. He had a personal tragedy before he met his wife. He lost his whole family after the tornado. So he couldn't afford romanticism and loveliness, and that's what Nannie was interested in. She was a fan of women's stories and magazines. The pragmatic husband, however, was their total opposite. Nannie was sick of him, as she later said. It worked on her nerves. Therefore, his fate was soon already predestined. The woman knew she would have to get rid of that husband too. Nannie made 2 attempts to kill her husband. First, I cooked him dried strawberries, which, of course, she filled with poison. She did well because he loved the delicacies himself. But the plums didn't work the way Nannie wanted them. My husband survived the attack on his life. But he went to the hospital. He spent almost a month in it. When he returned home, a caring wife gave him a cup of hot coffee. He drank it with pleasure, not knowing that along with the fluid through his throat, there were also mice for rats. He hasn't survived that anymore. After the murder of the 4th husband, luck stopped. The doctor decided to perform an autopsy to establish the exact cause of death, but she did not agree to it and was even convinced that establishing this fact was a priority. This move was extremely unfortunate for her because the autopsy showed that he was literally poisoned. Nannie was arrested on charges of murder of her husband, and to that, as you know, after more than 20 hours of interrogation, she finally confessed. She was suspected of killing a total of her husbands, 2 grandchildren, 2 of her own children, a mother-in-law, and a sister, although there are articles in which it is attributed to the death of both sisters. Nannie didn't admit to such a huge number of victims. She didn't feel offended by the investigators for being suspected of such horrible crimes, but the evidence collected every day only burdened her. Her versions of unfaithful husbands were unconfirmed, and poison was found in the bodies of the victims. He was suspected of getting rid of people in order to raise insurance money and start his life over and over again. Her story quickly captured the American media. The smiling woman in her glasses was a complete denial of the crimes she had committed. In addition, she liked to talk to journalists, and during the interviews, she sprinkled with energy and good humor. She was said to be simple and sincere. She was called a lovely grandmother. She often joked with the media and laughed loudly when she heard another joke. The readers and viewers were extremely curious about it, and the press and television successfully met this need. Nannie used every moment to flirt. She was always painted and shaved, ready to seduce even the cops when they came to her cell. She was seductively messing with them until she was finally forbidden to speak to officials who asked her defenders to do so, who feared that she would eventually be too honest and start telling about her crimes. Her lawyers refused to give explanations on behalf of her client, which the court found to be a failure to confess guilt. The woman was also referred to psychiatric testing, which is a natural step for serial killers. Interestingly, Nannie was perfect at the plant. She was a celebrity there. The journalists were still very interested in it, which aroused widespread admiration among the imprisoned. After 3 months of research, a group of doctors found that Nannie was mentally limited and showed the characteristics of clear disability, the ability to judge the situation, and willpower. It was recommended that she be placed in a hospital, not in prison. The prosecutors did not agree with such a diagnosis, which came to court. Therefore, a month later, another expert opinion was to be presented. One of them announced, "She is a cunning, clever, intelligent, calculated, selfish woman with a tendency to attach great importance to herself, in whose case aggressive behavior under the influence of frustration unleashes her hostility towards men, especially her husbands." Experts appointed by one side and the other were immersed in diagnoses and arguments for 3 days. Finally, after this psychological battle, the jury within 15 minutes decided that Nannie Doss was healthy and could be held accountable for her crimes. So the psychiatric hospital she dreamed of wasn't in the game. The surprise was the reaction of Doss herself, who admitted that he agreed with the decision. Unexpectedly, before the trial began, Nannie admitted guilt and killed her relatives. She must have thought that she would soften her sentence and gain the favor of the jury. She also believed that it would make her go to a psychiatric facility, but that was no longer possible. The decision was clear. Nannie wasn't mentally ill. She knew what she was doing, killing her loved ones. During the trial, the prosecutor applied for the death penalty, but the judge felt internal resistance to the execution of the woman, especially if she got on the electric chair, so he decided to send Nannie to prison, where she was to spend her life. After hearing the verdict, Doss, she only replied that she didn't feel sorry. After she got to jail, her story stopped electrifying the media. She slowly moved from screaming headlines to public abstinence. The public stopped reading about her, quoting her statements, interested in her fate. It was only after some time that one of the journalists spoke to her again and asked for a conversation. She confessed that she lost for kilos behind bars because she worked in the laundry. Besides, the headaches were getting stronger and stronger. She changed her version, too. She claimed that she was innocent and became the victim of a conspiracy. According to her, she was involved in confessing to the murder of her husbands, and she based her behavior in court on one of the stories she read in the book. She didn't want everybody to look at her as a murderer, and she stubbornly blamed the cops for her fate. She posed for an innocent member of the Club of Lonely Hearts, who just wanted to find love. Although Nannie still dreamed of being in a psychiatric hospital, in prison she also found herself perfectly. She took part in dances, she could watch movies and TV shows, and she could read romances that she loved. She had a good relationship with the director of the plant, who she said was like a second mother to her. Not lost her sense of humor in prison. She responded once when they missed people in the kitchen. "I always say I can help, but they never let me work there." These words are quoted in the press, which from time to time reminded itself of its existence and again tried to kindle interest in its history. The prison became her real home, although no relatives visited her. However, she did not seem to be concerned at all about this. But even with a laughing person like Nannie, after a few years of sitting down, a deteriorating mood was observed. The silent grandmother was becoming more and more silent, and she confessed to one of the journalists that she had no desire to live anymore. She even wanted to stand before the court again, this time in a different state where she believed she could be sentenced to death. She wanted the execution to end her life in prison. She also tried different ways to get out of the outside world for a while. She once pretended to have a heart attack, so she went to the hospital outside the facility. Of course, there was no infarction on the spot, but no one was able to pick her up for a few moments. Nannie Doss died after only 10 years in prison. She had leukemia. She died on June 2, 1965, age 60.